So planning is what we wanted to talk with you guys all about here today. Because planning, I think, affects everyone in one way, shape, or form. So the question is to plan or not to plan. Well, in my mind, that's not really a question. Everybody plans in one way, shape, or form. So what we're really going to cover here today is how we approach planning. There are many, many different approaches to planning and how we go about it. And today, myself and Dale are going to share our approaches. It can be anything from, hey, I have an idea, I have a direction, to I make lists and lists and lists. I collaborate with several people, and we work together. We make lots of charts. There's a variety of ways to go about this. So today, we're just going to cover a couple of those approaches with you all. So my plan, I thought I would just go through kind of my approach. And so the main thing with me is very detailed. That's just my nature. So I do a lot of research, discovery of, I've got my goal, I've set that. What are the components of reaching that? So I write it. Like I said, it has lots of details in it. I review it often. I rewrite it over and over again. And a lot of times because of this, especially with this group here at E4E, I've come to know of several softwares and things that I can do to make this more efficient for me. Because in my planning, I like to have a lot of information. That's just who I am. I'm an information gatherer. I need a lot of facts and figures and so on and so forth to really make that path of where I'm headed in my planning process. So I use things like Outlook, Excel, Teamwork. They help me put together what those tasks are that are involved in my plan. Because what I start with, and I've got an example here for you, this is a financial plan. And I'm not sure how well you guys can see that, but planning can be for all sorts of things. I use plans for the financial growth of my business. I use plans for what am I going to do today. I use plans for how am I going to get that next home remodel project done. I use plans for everything. And I believe that it's probably true that all of you do too, just in a variety of different ways. But the point to this is, in a financial planning process, and I thought that was fitting for me to share as an example, is first I say, what's my current situation? And then, what's the goal of where I want to be? From there, I determine what are the steps I can take to get there. Now, a lot of research and discovery comes in this next step of what are the steps I'm going to take to get there. When I assess those, I'm really looking for how long is it going to take? How much time is involved? What's the cost involved? Who needs to be involved? One of the things that has added to this area that has greatly helped me is who can I delegate this to help me out? Which, as you guys know who have been here for a while, I don't know, a year ago, 6 months ago, something like that, I did a presentation on delegating. And that's been a big thing too. So in this step, where I'm really looking at what are those tasks, what are those alternatives to get to my goal, I really look through all those details to figure out what all is involved, and I make plans, of how I'm going to accomplish that. Next, I actually create and implement the plan. So now I've got all my details, I've got my information, and I say, all right, this is the direction I'm going to go. So this is where I typically write. I write these out, I write out my tasks, and not always just pen and pencil, paper type of thing, but this is where I use the systems. I use Outlook or Excel or Teamwork, depending on what type of plan I'm putting together, determines what I need to do. And then the most critical, I think, of all is you have to review that plan and revise it. Make sure you're still on path. Are you headed towards that goal that you initially set? So this area is when I revisit that and I adjust my plan, and then I review those steps again and I continue on. This is where the rewriting comes in. After I've reviewed it, I'll say, oh, I need to add this or I need to add that. I rewrite it and I continue on. For me, writing a plan, having it Whether it's, like I said, pen and pencil or, in paper, or if it's actually in a system, a software, doesn't matter. I need to physically see it. I'm a visual person. So for me, just having it in my head, it's a great idea, but it won't move beyond that, typically. I need to have something I can physically look at, check off those boxes, see what I've accomplished, and move forward. So planning for me needs to have those steps in it. But if it's number one, it helps me eliminate and reduce stress and anxiety, because what I find, and this is a lot in my day-to-day planning, more so than a large project, but it applies to both. But my day-to-day, I find that I can get really anxious and stressed out as to, oh my gosh, how am I going to get all this done? What am I going to do? If I sit down and I look at, here's my task list, here's my plan of how I'm going to accomplish this, good, bad, or indifferent, that stress goes away from me. Because now I know I have a plan, I know how I'm going to get there, I know who's going to help me, and I no longer have to worry about that. Now, not to say that there's still not challenges, but that stress goes away from me when I see actually written down, here's my plan of how I'm going to get there. So that helps me greatly. And it also keeps me on track, because I think we're all pretty aware that so easily we can get distracted. So when we're going through our planning process and we're in the execution phase, well, you run into one thing and that leads to another, which leads to another, and pretty soon you're kind of off to the side of what your direction was in that plan and goal was. To where having it written, you can reference back to that, and you can say, well, that's a great idea, but maybe it needs its own plan. Right now, this is the plan I'm on, this is the goal I'm going to achieve. So having that plan in place, written, for me, keeps me right on track and going where I want to go. Now, with all that said, there is an area of caution here. Over-planning. It can be a problem. I can attest to it. Because I said I'm very detailed. I like a lot of information before I put that plan in motion and know the way I'm going to go. But the problem sometimes that comes with that you have to be very aware of is if you overplan, it can prevent you from ever moving forward on those action steps to accomplish that goal. And so one of the things I have to check myself with frequently is when I start to see that, this is taking me a long time to actually move forward towards this goal, where am I stuck in my planning process? It's typically in that detailed gathering, how am I going to move forward? I have to say to myself, okay, the stuff I'm waiting on to know more about, is that really going to have a big impact on this plan or not? Most times, it's not. And I could have been moving forward with it weeks prior if I had just got the bulk of it out, the stuff that really matters, and started moving forward with that plan. So just a word of caution with that is there is a tendency to overplan if you're a very detailed person like I am. And you got to be aware of that and make sure you don't get hung up on too many of those details and just continue moving forward with your plan. So with that, I'm going to hand it over here to Dale, and he's going to share a little bit about how he goes through the planning process. And you've got your mic, right?
My 30-day plan is to pick a direction and start moving. My 60-day plan is to make course corrections based on what I learned in the first 30 days and keep moving. And my 90-day plan, you guessed it, haven't you? Make further course corrections based on what I learned in phase 31 to 60 and keep moving. When I reach my destination, repeat the first step, the 30-day plan. That's it. That's my whole planning process. And when this topic came up and we talked to Bill about doing this program, he said, Dale, can you do a program on this? I said, Bill, that's 45 seconds. You want a 15-minute program. We have to get somebody else that really does some planning. And so we brought Lori into the mix here. But you can see, if we look at planning as a spectrum, Lori and I probably represent opposite ends of the spectrum. And they're not interchangeable. If you ask Lori to adopt my style, you better have oxygen and a defibrillator on hand, because she's going to be right in the cusp of a coronary event, right? If you ask me to use her approach, you better have a facility with padded walls and heavy restraints on your speed dial, because I'm going to become a danger to myself and others. So they're dramatically different styles, no question about it. But here's the one thing that they have in common, and one thing that that Lori and I both want to leave you with, is that you know that you've done enough planning when your mind is free of doubt, fear, and anxiety, when you have that sense of direction, that comfort, that peace of mind to know that you're ready to move forward. Anything beyond that, you've done too much. So wherever you are on that spectrum, doesn't matter what kind of method you choose, but wherever you are on that spectrum, you'll know that you've done enough planning when you've got that freedom from fear, anxiety, and doubt. With that, we'll turn it over to questions.
Can you guys repeat the question for the
Sure. Scott?
How do you bridge the gap between your two styles, like if you're in the same environment?
That's a good
That's
question.
a great question.
Yeah, I think that you have to be respectful of each other's styles and recognize the difference in styles. And I think when you have that awareness and you have the goal of trying to find a way to make it work for both, that you'll find a way. The question you have to ask yourself is, how are we going to make this work? And when you put your minds together, you'll find some common ground, something that will satisfy both needs, that'll provide just enough for Lori's style and yet allow me the fluid approach that I use in that planning process. But I think that it's a dialogue. It's a dialogue and a
Yes.
common goal.
Yeah, so Scott's question was, when you have opposite ends of the spectrum like that, how do you bridge that gap and pull it together? And I would have to agree with that, and I think a lot of it comes with just respecting people are going to have to handle that a little differently. So if you're a real detailed person like I am, and you're working with someone who's not, you've got your plan and you communicate effectively what pieces of the plan pertain to that person, but then I feel you have to let them utilize that, and you have to give them the leeway to utilize their own planning structure and take that and run with it. But then that communication of how you report back and get updates from that person and so on and so forth, then you update your plan accordingly, they've got theirs. But I think you just have to really respect everybody's approach and the communication of just keeping up with where they're at on that.
Okay. Bill, you had a question?
No,
That was the same question. Mark?
So I know that Dale's way is right, because that's the way I think.
Thank you, Mark.
However, I have to hire people to do exactly the way you think. What's one thing that I can work on to communicate so I don't anger that person who's in that organizational mindset that is not the way I think, to make it more effective communication? So if you and Dale were working together, what could he give you information-wise that would make you feel more comfortable reporting to him?
Well, I think so the question is, if Mark has the high level sense of direction, and if he's working with someone who's the detailed person, how can he communicate that to that person so that way everybody can work together? And I think a good example of that is how we came together in this presentation, because we talked about it and Dale's like, well, here's where we want to go, the direction. I'm thinking, okay, well, I need to get my introduction off, I need to get my presentation slides together, I need to get those to Dale so we can merge those together. I instantly start thinking of what tasks need to be done in order to accomplish this goal for this presentation. Dale's like, we got this presentation, isn't this going to be fun? Right? He knows what he's going to do. So I think really the communication that happened here was, we met and we talked about, here's our end goal, here's what we want to accomplish with the presentation. We felt it's going to be a lot of fun because we are so opposite in this, but it was the communication of deciding that end goal and then what needs to be done to get there. But again, I didn't say, okay, Dale, where's your list for me to look at? Because he's not going to have a list there for me to look at, right? It was in that upfront communication. I, on my own, because that's my style, I could have gone with that, but I need my lists. I need my process. So for me, our conversation is where it started. We communicated that end goal. We knew and agreed upon where we were headed. And then I was able to take it from there to do my detail. He was able to take it from his side and accomplish what he needed to with his slides. So I think it's communication, it's that conversation that has to happen and make sure that that end goal is what's understood, and then you communicate from there. And have your deadlines, have things like that, but you don't necessarily have to adapt to that same detailed style.
Yeah.
Dale and I can teach you if you like, Lori.
I don't think I'd survive.
No, I think Lori's exactly right. You know, to me, the two keys are, one is that you are aware of the differences in your styles, and number two, that you're respectful of those two differences in styles. And the reality is that we've got, what, 50 people in the room? Each of us has a slightly different style in that regard. So, you know, it's rare that any two people, like you and I, Mark, would do this the same way. But it's, you know, those are the keys. Being aware of it, number one, and then being respectful of it, and then structuring it in a way so each gets their needs satisfied. Other questions? Great, well, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.